All right, so let's talk about gathering requirements. As we presented earlier, throughout the semester, we'll say that the requirements gathering phase is the most vulnerable part of the project. Okay, it is where most of our mistakes are done because we either understand something different from what the client is saying, or the client is not consistent. They contradict themselves, and it's where we can create most of the errors, right, going forward. And the later we deal with these errors, the more expensive the overall project is going to be. So we're going to be talking about the skills and the methodologies of acquiring requirements, and also the life cycle of requirements. So requirements not only they need to be gathered, right, which is on itself very, very complicated, but also requirements evolve over time, right, and there needs to be a process by which we allow those changes to occur over time. Right? How do we manage? How does it affect the timeline of the overall project? And what are the negotiations that might go along with that? Right? How do we verify that we have actually achieved a particular requirement? And how do we formally document those kinds of things? One of the here's a funny graphic that says, well, go and find out what it is that we need to build. Meanwhile, you go ahead and start coding, right? Which is pretty much what we as developers, we all rather be coding, right? The fun part of a software developer is to just go and start building something, right? The difficulty is to identify what it is that we're building, right? What is it that we're all putting our efforts? And it's oftentimes that happens that if we're at work and we don't find ourselves actually typing and coding, we feel that we're either wasting time or that we're not putting our efforts where it should be. Okay, and we have to be a little bit more open to the fact that this is a social system, right? That we are building something for somebody, right? That our efforts is not outside of some context, right? It's not outside of some overall goal. Sometimes we feel that we are disconnected from this goal. We don't really know what the overall goal might be, and so we'd love to just focus on our little world, right? So the effort is to see how what we are coding, right? How does it benefit, or how does it? We're all pointing all efforts towards an equal goal. So what is that goal? Oftentimes it's very vague. That the folks that are asking us to build something, they don't even know what it is that they want us to build, and it is our part of the job is to help them identify what it is that they need. They might want something, and because they've read it, or somebody has suggested it to them, a particular stack that is it's all the rave today. Also just build something with React. React native, right? It says, but what is it that you want to solve? Well, I don't know. Let's use React. And so we oftentimes have a solution looking for a problem, right? Where it should be the other way around, right? We have a problem and we're looking for what the solution should be. Okay. So this one's pretty funny. It says, let's gather the requirements. What are the requirements? Well, the requirements that you're going to build software for me. But what is it that you want me to build? And I'd say, well, I don't know what it is that you want that you can build for me. I need to know what it is that you can build for me before I tell you what I want you to build. So it's this conundrum of saying, well, which goes first? It says, well, we can really build anything, right? But you need to tell me what it is explicitly that you want me to build. I'll say, well, if you can build anything, can't you build something that can pretty much just read my mind, right? That could come up with the requirements for me, and eventually we will have that. AI at some point will be smart enough that it will know even before ourselves might know. They might already know what we want. The other day I was looking at a TV at Best Buy, and I wanted to search online, reviews on that particular TV. I'm standing there, and I typed the first letter of the TV code. And the first thing that comes up is a suggestion of that particular TV, right? So that's pretty scary. That Google perhaps can can tell us what we're going to do within a pretty accurate amount of accuracy, how much our next step will be. Right? We have perhaps we have very boring lives and very predictable lives. So eventually perhaps we might have this. Until then, we need to interact with humans. We are humans. We're messy, and it's we don't necessarily understand each other very well. So we're trying to create a predictable process by which we can over time perhaps understand each other. Somebody's making all these grunt sounds, trying to paint a picture on your head, right? I have a picture in my head, and with all these mechanical communication, we're trying to very low bandwidth communication, trying to trying to paint on your head the same picture that I have in my head, right? Even though my picture might be completely flawed, and as you trying to parse what I'm saying, perhaps your picture might be a little bit flawed as well, right? So we try to come to an agreement on what it is that we're saying, right? So there's some of the processes that were generated early on in the 70s was a very step-by-step process where we would have communications, and we would gather requirements. We would once we interviewed the client went one way and we went another way and started planning. Presumably, we understood exactly what it is that we were going to build and started planning. What are we going to do to achieve? This assumed that we understood exactly what the domain knowledge was. We understood exactly that what the client actually explained themselves exactly what they wanted, and we understood it 100%. And we went through the planning. We created all these data models. We actually built it, deployed it, went back to the client, a year later or 2 years later, and the client hated it. And we said, well, but this is exactly what you told me to build. And it says, yeah, I know that's what I told you to build, but now that I see it, I hate it, right? And so lately the process has been to modify this original methodology and try to shorten it, right? Try to condense it so that we get more feedback from the user much earlier than just waiting till the very last minute. So this has been the legacy classical mechanism that often we refer to as the waterfall mechanism, where we go on and we create all sorts of formal mechanisms where we describe what the users want to accomplish, what their goals are. We describe who those folks are, what are their general roles in the organizations, and step by step we write in a very generic but accurate set of steps what it is that they do, right? They fill out these forms, they submit them over here, then they wait for the form to come back, accept it or not, and then we try to understand what the pieces of data that are being captured, what is the relationship between that data, so we can create a formal model of that data. So how is it that we get to this communication? So the first part of it is I'd like to just focus on the first part of the process, which is gathering the requirements, right? Which is either following folks, filling out forms, and interviewing them. And so the idea is what is it? What is a requirement in general? Right? So in general, a requirement is something that you are committing, right? You are committing to do something. Right, that there's a capability that we have agreed on, and you are committing of delivering that particular feature, right? That presumably solves somebody's problem, right? And we want to formally sign off and say, hey, the system is going to be able to do X, right? And sign here, and you agreed that indeed the system will do X at the end of this process. Yes. But deciding that that the system needs to do X, that's the really hard part. Even though it might feel simple, if it's a trivial system, then of course, right? But oftentimes, anything that involves several dozen folks, it's not going to be trivial. It's going to be a month, multi-year, and no one person will be able to understand the full extent of the project, right? And there's going to be a lot of miscommunication going back and forth between the various folks that are involved in the process. So what is a requirement? So it's a capability that presumably wants to solve a particular problem or achieve an objective. It's some capability and that satisfies a contract, right? An agreement between the developer or whoever's building this and the person who is asking you to build it. And that is formally documented so that we can all agree that yes, this is what we're building. And there's different techniques of gathering these requirements. The more formal one that is used widely still is that we explicitly use a certain formal syntax where we say that the system will do or shall do X, right? The system will not do X, right? And we use keywords such as the system must do or must not do or is required to do or shall do in a very formal, almost legal template, right? Where we fill out just a very long list of things or features that the system should be able to do at the end of this process. Yes, and some of these are standardized, right? Under several standards, right? So, for instance, you might have must or must not, or should not, or may, and these have evolved over time. There's folks that study the process of just handling these requirements, right, and managing these requirements over time, right? There's a whole set of skills that folks who specialize in this, right, become certified on how to manage projects over time, right? It's a very, very hard skill. Okay, these folks usually fall in between two worlds, right, or competing worlds. They fall between the client and the folks that are asking this to be done, and the developers, right? And usually these are two audiences that oftentimes collide, right? And the folks that are managing these requirements fall between these two worlds, right? They're going to need to be able to interact with the client that might have different delivery schedules. They might have costs that they have to meet, right? They want to make sure that they don't necessarily understand the process or the implications of them changing their minds over time. They don't understand these kinds of things, and the business analyst that is gathering all these requirements and managing the client needs to be able to manage their expectations, right? And say, well, if you want to change this is going to impact the overall schedule, right? How about we negotiate and perhaps change this feature for this other feature, right? And the client, as far as the client is concerned, everything is important, right? It is, and the business analyst has the very difficult task, right, of pushing back, right, of managing the expectations. It's a very, very hard skill. With this, at the same time, they have to deal with the developers, right, that have their own challenges, right? That oftentimes what a client thinks is very hard, it's actually very easy, or what the client might think is very easy, it's actually very hard. So it's a very fine line to walk between these two audiences, right? Right. So there's definitely a challenge of parsing natural language. Natural language is it's ambiguous, right? It can be interpreted depending on the context, right? Although it's very expressive, it's very intuitive. Everybody understands natural language. It's nevertheless it's a messy endeavor, right? Perhaps we should have left the Facebook AIs that were generating their own languages see what they would have come up with a better way of communicating. So for instance, you capture a piece of text that says, the assignment shall be due on the date assigned. Where you parse it, it might seem that it's obvious, right? It says, well, what do you mean? Right? Is there how do I specify that something is assigned? When is exactly due? Is there a month, a day, a year? There's an hour, there's minutes, right? How granular do you want to be able to capture that particular requirement? How vague is vague, right? Or how accurate is accurate, depending again on the context. Is a day enough, or is an hour and minute necessarily to go that granular? Here's another example of just how ambiguous natural languages is that could be based, that could have different interpretations depending on how you parse it. I saw a man on the hill with a telescope, and it says, do you mean that you were using a telescope to see who that somebody was out there in the hill, or was a person on the hill using a telescope, right? So there's different ways of parsing this. What was the one that my son came up the other day? Just with the word buffalo. Buffalo, 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 buffalo. And depending how you parse it, it means something completely different. Yes? Okay, sure. And there's a whole bunch of these, right? Depending on how you interpret it as a noun, a verb, an adjective, right? There's different ways of interpreting it. So English is and natural languages in general are messy, a messy endeavor. Obviously, these ambiguities, these have obviously had consequences. Some of them very, very costly, of which we have already listed a few. Just disasters in software development that have run, very, very expensive, and just a lot of them are just failures. Almost half of the failures can be traced back to the original the phase where you were gathering these requirements, right? Whether they were the requirements were incomplete, or the user was not available, right, to answer questions, and we just had to go on with our own particular interpretation, right? And that or when we did meet with the user always changed their mind, right? They say, well, let's move this from here to there, and without and we failed to deal with the expectations. It says if you make those changes, that's going to impact the overall health of the application. Also, unrealistic expectation. That is really the hardest part. Dealing with the expectation, handling expectation. Sometimes developers are just they underestimate the time that something's going to take. They overestimate their capabilities of being able to deliver something, and just as a human being, we hate to say no, right? When somebody asks us to do something, we keep saying, sure, we could do that. We feel all powerful that we can build anything, but again, we fail to be realistic, and we go a lot with our gut feeling, right? Right. So a requirement, as we said earlier, is going to be kind of like a commitment, right? Something like a contract, right? That you are committing to, that you are going to deliver a particular set of goals, right? Of skills. So there's certainly the risks that each folk can understand a requirement differently. That we can all have a different interpretation, and it could be that some of the requirements are just irrelevant, right? They don't actually achieve what is actually needed, right, for the overall business goal. Some of the things that might be perceived as very important and might actually be realistically might not be very important. Okay, that what if you ask some subset of the audience in the business, they might feel that certain requirements are absolutely necessary, right? That we certainly cannot deliver the system without fulfilling certain requirements. Whereas some other folks might feel that that's not very important. That's there is very important. So there's a process where everybody has to vote on how do they feel that their particular piece of their requirement is has an impact overall the business, right? Do you feel that if your requirement were not going to go, your business is going to fail? Do you really feel that your business would not run without that? So they would have to vote on that, right? And then you might have different audiences voting. In a scale between 0 and 10, how do you feel that your particular requirement affects the overall health of the business, right? And you might have a different range of votes, right? A lot of the folks will be in the 8 and 10s. Some of the folks will be in the 2s and 3s. And then they would go into discussions on why do you feel it's so important. And once they've battled it out, they might vote again. And as they vote and hear what other folks have to say, you see that those votes tend to naturally, right, go towards skew towards the lower scale or the higher scale. And you do this with each one of the requirements, right? And you start being able to sift through the requirements and really focus on the ones that are that we are going to focus first. Okay. And obviously, from our point of view, is what they really cares. What the client actually really cares is what you deliver at the end of the day, right? What it is actually that it's going to be deployed and whether it works, right? The actual results of the solution. The problem is that if that's what we want, and some folks are pulling one way and some folks are pulling another way, right? It's very, very hard to steer, right, the whole process towards the end goal. If nobody's steering and everybody's just going blindly and exploring ways to go this way and going that way, we might end up where we want to be. We might not end up, right? And so this would not be a business that we're running, but we are running maybe a research facility, right, where we're just exploring, right, and we're just considering this and see where we end up. We're not really sure what we end up, right? But that's typically not the type of projects that you're going to be engaging in, right? You're going to have somebody who's paying for this and really wants a return on their investment, right? And so they want to make sure that whatever effort is being expended, that it's toward towards a predictable goal. So a little later. In the 90s, some of the focus turned away from the process and towards a little more focus on the end user, right? Who are we building this for? The processes that went in the 70s and 80s were very process heavy, right? It was mostly focused on let's do the process for process sake, right? Hoping that the process was strong enough, right, that it would yield a good result, and everybody would just follow the process for process sake. Yes.
Do you really feel like that's changed? I feel like that's an essential feature of psychology.
Well, we're trying to. Well, that was the obvious thing to do, right? To describe a very well-defined process, but the thing is that humans think that things are very static. Or think things that move in linear form, where things actually move in very exponential, and we are very bad at predicting, right? So what we're trying to do is says, well, we're very bad at predicting what's going to happen, right? So can we shorten that and says, okay, can I predict what I'm going to do next, in the next day or so, maybe next week, and perhaps shorten it and just focus on what I'm going to do this week. Right, never mind what I'm going to do in a year from now. And so what we're trying to do is, okay, so let's grab some of the formalities of these systems, but let's be a little more realistic. I can tell you what I'm going to do this afternoon, but I'm definitely not going to be able to tell you what I'm going to do next month, right? Because again, we can't think in an exponential or geometric sense where we think in a very linear, and so that's what I think that's what we've been able to evolve away from, right? Would you agree?
No, I don't think we're going anywhere.
But with agile and the new formalities.
I don't know. So I worked actually my last co-op at a place that was very waterfally and it seemed to work great. So
Okay.
ever since then I've been very skeptical. The one-sided, waterfall is evil, agile.
Oh no, it's yeah. Yeah, no. If there's a process that has been legacy for quite a while, that has been very well understood, and the domain knowledge is very well spread out, and there's institutionalized knowledge across the enterprise, right? Where folks that have been working on something for quite a while and is very well understood, right? So certainly, I've worked on quite a few that also has been a lot of skeptical, moving away from waterfall, since it's been working perfectly forever, especially on financial systems or systems that have been around for quite a while. So don't break it, right? If it, don't fix it if it's not broken, right? And it certainly has proven very, very, very effective on some of these domain knowledge, right? Now there's a lot of change. Some of the technology is changing so fast, and some of the requirements are changing so fast, and some of the clients are being so picky or finicky on being able to change their minds. So that capability of being able to answer quickly to those requirements, that certainly introduces. Go ahead.
I was going to say we were actually working on a new product.
Okay.
Sort of like I hate this as a tagline. AI search engine.
AI. Okay.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. We'll happily.
Off topic here.
Yeah.
Go back to your lecture.
Yeah. Sure. Where was I? Right. So we and all processes have suffer from us focusing on the process, right? Of even today in agile, even though it's supposed to be very very flexible and whatnot, oftentimes we find ourselves documenting for documentation purposes, or just for documenting sake. We'll create all the data models and all the UML class diagrams, all the use case diagrams. We'll document everything, even if we don't really need it, right? And so the focus has been, hey, let's only do enough to be able to understand what it is that we're trying to build. And once we know that what we need to build, then let's not document any further, right? It's kind of like just-in-time documentation, just-in-time process. Enough process just not to be chaotic, borrowing a lot from what we know has already worked in the past, but then applying it using new techniques. So in the 90s there was a lot of change from a process heavy towards trying to include the user as part of the process more, right? As opposed to letting the user go off on their own. Instead, having them participate and be part of the team, right? Where they can steer the process depending on if they saw certainly if they saw progress throughout the process, they can then provide feedback and help steer the process into where we all want to be. So oftentimes we refer to this process like the analysis and the design, and each one refers to two different aspects of the process. So one of them is being able to define what is it that we're building, the what, right? What is it that we're building, and which might be more strategic, right? It says this is the overarching goal, whereas design might specify what are the processes that we're actually going to follow to fulfill and implement that, right? So this might be more the tactical, right? What are the tactics that we might apply to actually achieve the what, right? So here's an example on somebody having gone and created a fairly extensive set of requirements that no one person is expected to read through any of this, right, and make any sense out of it, right? It has to be a team effort, right? That perhaps we can divvy it up. And all these techniques are dealing with complexity, right? If it's something that is trivial enough that one person or just a small team can do, then all this just is unneeded, right? All these techniques and analysis and design is just an overkill, right? We're talking about systems that are big enough that no one person can possibly understand all of it, right? And it has to be a team effort. So here's a one that Dilbert that is looking at requirements and looks that it's way too big for me to be able to even read it, and just weighs on it and see, well, it's pretty hefty. Just by weighing it, I can tell what we need, and then it says, are you sure you can tell? I mean, it's pretty much perhaps our politicians do something similar when they have laws and bills that go through Congress, right? They don't really read what's in it before they even vote on it. So it's too big, and but nevertheless, we are humans. Humans, if we are distinct in any way from other animals, is that we're very good at organizing ourselves and collaborating. Okay, and even collaborating with folks that we don't even know. And we've invented many different techniques to be able to collaborate with one another. Okay, with folks we barely know. So part of the process of gathering the requirements, that first very important phase of any project, is first identify who we're building this for, right? What is the representative audience, right? That accurately represents the folks we're building this for, right? Who has the pain points, right? That has the domain knowledge to be able to steer and give us feedback on whether we are actually building what they need. Then there's a process of actually meeting with them and interviewing them and having them fill out forms and answer questions and vote. And this process we refer to as eliciting the requirements. And this might be perhaps a large team that might come in, and then perhaps several meetings that follow those large meetings into smaller groups, right, where each one is able to speak their mind, perhaps having filled out several forms, and then vote on different aspects of the project. So and then once we have a huge list of requirements, we need to start prioritizing, right? We have these thousands and thousands of requirements, and there is certainly the reality of time and cost, right? How much are you willing to spend on this, right? And how much are you willing to invest on this, right? What is your timeline? How much money? What's the time? The team that you have, and depending on those constraints, right? We need to start saying, well, what do you think we can deliver in the next 3 months, in the next 6 months, in the next year or 2 years, right? And be able to decide out of these thousands of requirements, what are we going to do first, right? So we'll identify the requirements. We'll start perhaps coming up with a draft schedule of what is that is going to be done first, right? On the first phase, second phase, third phase, and again, managing everybody's expectations of what is it going to be built, and then we're going to start prototyping only enough that it will help. It will help make decisions about the requirements, right? Oftentimes, in these meetings, it's very hard for the stakeholders to visualize what it is that they want. So there might be a team, part of this requirements solicitation, where they're very good at Photoshop or very good at HTML, and they can, or very good at PowerPoint, and very easily just draw up, some paper prototypes that the stakeholders can play around with and click here and there, and then they can visualize in their minds what this would look like, and then it would feed into the requirements elicitation process, right? And make decisions on help them make decisions on what to build first and identify the various priorities of these requirements. Okay. So stakeholders, who are the stakeholders? So stakeholders are folks that are involved in the process, that are the ones that maybe are paying the bills, right? That are the owners, that are responsible in their own area of expertise in the organization. There might be actual users, right, that use the system day to day, and they have their own mind, right, on what should the system do. They might not know what the possibilities are out there, and so they might come with their own biases on what the system should be, and it is our responsibility to listen to all the stakeholders, anybody who's going to benefit from this, anybody who's going to be impacted somehow by our system. Some of these folks are going to be internal users within the organization. Some of them might be end users, right, that might be using products that might be putting out, or it might be some folks that we interact either legally or through business to business, or governmental agencies, right, that might have a say on what the overall project might be. All right, so anybody who is affected by the system is a stakeholder. Some folks that that need to regulate, any organizations that regulate the domain where the system is going to be built, and anybody who's opposed to your system, right, or anybody who has to eventually need to operate your system day to day, right, in different environments and deploying it in different in various environments. The folks that are involved in purchasing and procuring the system. So there might be a lot of folks that have a say on your particular system. Okay. So eliciting requirements is all about interviewing and dealing with folks through various systematic meetings, where again you might have large groups, you might have smaller groups, or different folks that split off into depending on their particular concerns, that they're trying to gather these requirements, and we play the part of the facilitator, where we facilitate these meetings, giving everyone a chance to talk, and we're just, and somebody might be responsible for being a scribe, right, to make sure that they write down everything, and obviously through forms that the stakeholders or the interviewers are filling out. It is our responsibility to not to put the interviewee at ease, right, that they find comfortable and free to say anything that they want. That we don't give any judgment, right, or somehow make them feel uncomfortable when they are describing all their requirements. We don't make any weird faces or any weird as they are describing, and as pie in the sky as it might be, or as we might know, being domain experts, how ridiculous some of the ideas might be, right? It is our responsibility just to facilitate, all the gathering of the information, right? It is later that we might start putting values on how valuable a particular requirement is against other requirements, right? And how it might be scheduling these priorities. We systematically going to go through the requirements over and over, making sure that everybody understands the same thing, that there's no misinterpretation. It's very, very hard, and I'm sure many of you might find this to be boring, of gathering these. We'd all rather be coding, but then, the question is, if you'd rather be coding, well, what are you coding, right? Typically, it's always within a context. Right? It's always because there's some business need that you are actually coding. Right? You would never find yourself, unless it's your company, or it's somebody is paying you, right, to solve a particular business need. Right? That there's some actual problem that we like to solve. Okay? So why is elicitation hard? Oftentimes we don't quite understand what the overall scope of the project is. Right? We don't know the boundaries. It might feel, even in a course, right? Any course that you go, you don't really know what the boundaries might be. When you don't know anything, everything's important, right? Not until you understand where the boundaries are that you might feel a little more comfort on says, okay, well, so this is the universe, right? This is the solar system. This is the Earth, right? This is our company, and this is what we're building, right? Not until you understand the boundaries is that we start feeling some confidence that we can actually tackle a particular problem, right? That's one of the hardest things to come up with. What is the scope? How big is this that we're building? Are we going to be able to do it in the next 2 or 3 months within the boundaries of this course? Within the boundaries of a quarter, right? Or boundaries of a particular fiscal year. Are we going to be able to hit and do this in a particular boundary? And how much detail do we want to actually require? Also, again, problems of understanding what some folks might want is not actually what they need, right? Some folks might have a poor understanding of how computer systems work in general, and might have a misconception of the challenges of building different systems. What something might be obvious to some might be completely very, very important to be expelled out. That needs to be completely explicit. There might be some folks that are not familiar with that particular domain, right? And you might not know if something needs to be modeled as a class, or should it be an attribute or a property? Is something a part of something else? If you know the domain, it might be trivial to you, right? You know that a playlist is made up of songs, right? So presumably those are two classes, and there's going to be a one-to-many relationship between the two. But if somebody comes and starts talking to you about a domain that you don't know, about chemistry or physics or quantum mechanics, or a particular domain that you're not familiar with, you might not know that a particular noun makes up some other nouns, right? Also, we fail to identify how important or how malleable the overall process is, right? Everything is moving. We typically think we're very our minds typically focus on the now, and we always think that everything is very permanent, right? That nothing is moving, when actually everything is moving, right? We say something today and we come back tomorrow, it's not true anymore, right? And everything is just moving. Everything is so volatile, and you need to be able to deal with that chaos, right? All these mechanisms are ways that we are trying to deal with the second law of thermodynamics, right? Everything tends to chaos, right? And perhaps it's the root of human suffering, right? We're trying always to combat the second law of thermodynamics, right? Everything tends to chaos, and we're just always trying to make things try to have some form of organization, and it's just futile. Also, availability. The folks that actually know, the folks that are expert at that particular domain, are not available. When we need to, when we have a question, those folks that know the most probably are very busy doing their day-to-day job, right? The day-to-day work, and their hours are very expensive, right? The fact that this person needs to be taken away from a very important meeting or a business decision, the overall process of the business, it'd be very, very expensive that they have to meet with the different the development team or the business analyst teams, and it's very expensive. So we want to make sure that we deal with those aspects as well. So yeah, it's very, very hard to elicit those requirements. So there's quite a few different types of requirements, and of which these are some of them. Functional requirements and non-functional requirements. Those are two distinct types of requirements. One of them focuses more on what the system has to do, right? Whereas the other one, the non-functional requirements, are a little more vague, and they focus more on aspects or properties of the system, right? And we'll see examples of them in a minute. Then you have various constraints, right? That something has to be delivered by a particular date, or within a particular budget, or a particular technology stack, or with the domain knowledge that you have for your particular team, right? With whatever constraints that might be, and then you have the ways of capturing those requirements. Eventually, might be some formal documentation of contracts that literally impose a commitment between the parties of what it is that we agree that we're going to build, and then forms of capturing the detailed steps-by-steps description of what users are intending to use the system to achieve specific goals, documented as user cases and user stories. So let's take a look at some of these requirements. So here we have a fairly complex system that just makes a good old cup of coffee, and some of the requirements that might be associated to this particular system. So first, let's look at the functional, what we call functional requirements, and you'll all be expected on Thursday if our guest does come in, right? That you'll be interviewing these folks, and you'll be gathering these requirements, functional requirements, non-functional requirements, use case analysis, and whatnot. You're going to be documenting this, going forward for that particular, within that particular team, for that particular product, for that particular client. So a functional requirement, the definition is an action that the product must take. So the product must be able to do this, right? Something like the product shall track individual payments of coffee serving. So typically it's identified as a verb phrase. Shall track. Must heat. Right. The product must heat water to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Right. So typically it's like a verb phrase. Must do something. An action that it will take. Right. Non-functional requirements specify certain qualities or properties that the system must have, right? Oftentimes there we refer to them as the elicities, right? That are associated to a system, whether it has to be understandable, it needs to be maintainable, right? It needs to be scalable, right? It needs to be reusable. So all these somewhat vague, some of them might be somewhat vague aspects that perhaps might be a little bit harder to measure, right? But nevertheless, it's kind of, when you see it, you can tell that it is there when you see it, right? It's a property or quality of the system. For instance, the product shall be accessible in English and Spanish. So shall be, right? It's a clue that this is a property of the system. So it's not explaining that it's taking a particular action, right? It might be that from this one requirement, this one particular non-functional requirement, we might derive several functional requirements, right? That it will load the Spanish dictionary, the Italian dictionary, the French dictionary, right? It will translate certain phrases, that it will index certain phrases and recover them to be able to display it on the screen. So there might be that some of these might be expressed in more detail, right? In additional related requirements. The other one is the product must be capable of serving 45 cups of coffee. So that one's pretty definitely easier to measure, right? So it's 45 cups of coffee per hour, right? So presumably you can have a testable requirement and make sure that indeed is. Other things, you might say that it should be able to be accessible to so many thousands of people that can access it simultaneously. That it should not have failures within a particular range, right? That it should not be down for more than so many minutes per week or per month or per year. So all these types of quality, typically of performance quality, right? Security qualities, right? Those are all fall under the non-functional requirements umbrella. Okay. So constraints. So these might be these might be imposed by the business because they want to be ready by the holidays, right? Or they might have a particular budget that they have in mind, that they might have to meet certain legal requirements, certain regulatory requirements, right? That pose constraints that need to be met by the product, right? Or by the team to be able to meet a particular deadline and whatnot, right? So also, depending on your client, there might be certain security measures, right? That need to be put into consideration as you are developing the system. So contract is one way to document these requirements, where you formally list in a software requirements documents. You list the various requirements. Typically, they'll be numbered. So that we can track these requirements, the life cycle of these requirements across user stories, then branches in Git, and then perhaps described in Jira, and then once they get merged into master, we can follow the whole life cycle of a particular requirement flowing through the various software life cycle and see that indeed there is code, right, that we wrote to fulfill a particular requirement. So presumably any code that you are writing, right, is because it's trying to fulfill one of these business requirements. You would never find yourself, presumably, unless it's a research or an exploratory or proof of concept that you need to explore so that you can then come back and feed into the rest of the process. Typically, any code that you write will be within the context of fulfilling one of these requirements. Okay, so here's One of the useful things to do is to categorize or classify the various features on certain things that like a checkbox, making sure that indeed it is fulfilling the following features, right? It must have, right? And presumably you would be generating also acceptance criteria and test cases that would be verifying and checking to see that indeed it has these features, or that it doesn't have these features, right? And different levels of acceptance criteria on whether we met it or not. Okay, so must-haves, may have, or must not have. Okay. So the contract typically is between. It's a formal, very precise, and hopefully verifiable description of what is that's going to be built, and signed off between the whoever's sponsoring the system, whoever's paying the bills, right, and the developer and the development team, right? It could be, again, it could be hundreds of pages of these requirements over. Nobody is realistically expected to be able to just know all these requirements by heart, right? It's just untenable, and that's why it becomes a team effort, and that's what just makes the process just so complex. Oftentimes we might say we take the simple road that whatever the users want, it becomes a requirement, right? So everything that they want, we're going to give them, right? Even if it's not in the best interest of the business, right? Whatever the users said as suggestions, they just became a new feature as a requirement of the system. Certainly, this is an oversimplification of the requirements gathering process. It's certainly much more complicated than just that, right? So one of the ways that we typically gather requirements is to document them using what are called use cases, right? Where we're going to try and capture the various folks that are using the system, and we're going to refer to them as actors. Actors can take a particular action, right, on the system. Not necessarily needs to be human actors. It could be representing some other system that we might be interacting with. It could be another business-to-business communication, right? Some of this might be all automated, right? Might be some batch systems that runs every night, right? That goes off and FTPs some CSV across in Europe and brings it over, and then imports it into a database. So that might be an actor, but oftentimes these actors are human actors, right? And we especially want to focus on these human actors. Typically, we have a dictionary of these actors and describing them, perhaps a particular demographic, a particular genre, a particular gender or age group, right? That we might be targeting, right? And then once we describe them, we describe also what might be their role in the organization. What are their overall goals in the organization? And then once we describe all the actors, we then just refer them by name. We might give them names so that we might make up names, right? There's Alice and Bob and Charlie, right? And they presumably represent somebody, a stakeholder in that's going to be using your system. And then you refer to Alice in your use cases, saying that, hey, Alice is trying to purchase something, right? They're trying to add a product into their shopping cart. They're trying to pay. They're trying to check out. They're trying to fill in the billing address and whatnot, right? And we want to describe as detailed as possible what are all the use cases, what are all the scenarios that these users might find themselves, right? And then describe step by step how they would actually accomplish a particular goal. So use cases allows us to document these interactions between the actors, again, not necessarily humans, but most of the times we're talking about human actors, and how they interact with the system, and what does the actor do, and how does the system respond, right? So we want to identify who the actors are. What are the and also we also want to identify if an actor is going to be interacting with something, right? Are they interacting with our system, or are they interacting with something else that we don't control, right? So we want to make sure that we identify exactly what it is that we're building, right? That yes, the actor does a lot of things throughout the day, right? But some of the things that they do are interacting with things that we have no control over, right? Or have no bearing on the things that we are actually building, right? So we want to identify the boundaries of the system, and identify what are the software boundaries, what is the stack, whether it's going to be deployed in-house, the servers that are going to be hosting this. We're going to identify, or whether it's going to be hosted on the cloud. Identify all the users that are going to be interacting, and is it just the users? Is it the overall organizations? Or it might be a subsystem, right? It might be something that we're developing only for marketing, or for sales, or for engineering, right? So it might not necessarily be something that is for an enterprise application, right? It might be something that has a smaller scale. So again, identify the primary actors, basically the stakeholders, and given each one of those actors, what are their goals? What are the things that they're trying to accomplish from day to day? And presumably the system that we're building is going to fulfill those goals, right? So we want to capture the interactions. So here's an example from a product, Safe Home, that was designing an online camera system that allowed folks to log in and see various cameras throughout their property, and choose what were the views from each one of the cameras. And so in this case, this is a use case from that product, and this was a very high level human natural language description of the system, right? This was from one of the early interviews between interactions between the business analyst and the client. You might say that here's a homeowner, and I'm a remote location. I can use any PC with appropriate browser software to log on to the website. I enter the user ID, a couple of passwords to identify that it's me. Once I'm validated, I can use the entire functionality of the camera. Right? I can view, see that there are several views that are available to me, and I can choose a particular view select the view from my particular camera, and I have thumbnails for the other cameras that are not immediately displaying on my main view. Now, so this is fairly vague, right? It's fairly high level natural language, and the process of eliciting the requirements is how can we make this a little more formal, right? How can we go through the process and eventually ask somebody to build this, right? So we want to go through the formalities of making sure that we understand. Okay, so we can list them in bullet points, right? That the homeowner can log in, they can enter their IDs, they can enter their passwords. So we are, very distinctly going from something that was fairly analog to something that perhaps is a little more digital, right? More discrete, right? Something that was kind of a little bit of fluff to being something that is more, actionable, right? And so the process, again, and you'll have a chance to do that on Thursday, I hope, is that right? The interview will the client will speak in a lot of generalities and be very vague, and it'll be your responsibility to reinterpret, right, all that fluff, right, and then capture it in a much more systematic, more discrete set of explicit requirements. Okay, so that will be the first step, right, of eliciting requirements. And again, that is the most vulnerable part of the project. Yeah, that is where most of the errors, most of the mistakes are made, right? It's very artful, right? It's not very scientific, right? It's it's very open-ended, right? And and again, it's just messy. Dealing with humans is messy, and we just have to go in with the right expectations, and be a lot of patience, and just always be ready to manage expectations. Okay. All right. So that's a refined scenario. Again, it might be a little bit too high level, and for each one of them, for each one of these refined scenarios, it might be that each one of those could be broken off into even more details. Right? How do you actually enter your password? Where do you have to actually navigate to be able to enter all this information? What pages is this being displayed? Is it just one page, or is it across many different pages? Right? Is it a button? Can I speak to this? Can I, what are the various things? And also, this might be the happy path, right? Everything goes fine. I enter my website, my ID, my 2 passwords, and then I can start clicking. What happens if I forget my password? What happens to all the things that could go wrong, right? So usually you might start off with the just documenting the happy path, right? If everything goes right, but then you need to certainly document what happens when something goes wrong. Right? How do you deal with those? What are the alternative paths, right, that the user might take depending on the various errors? Right. So alternative interactions would cover all the things that might go wrong. Right. Any error conditions if I forgot my password, or maybe I typed it in wrong, right? Or forgot it, or just unexpected behaviors of the system. How do I handle any of them, right? So we need to explore and document all these additional requirements. Oftentimes, when we meet the client doesn't know, what should happen. What should I display if a list? We tend to think of the system in steady state. Once a system has been used for quite a while, right, and we have lots and lots of data that we need to display either in a format or as a list. But what happens when there's too few or too many? What kind of scrolling do we want to use? Do we need to use pagination, right? If you're talking about thousands and thousands of records, are we just going to display all 1,000 records in just one single place, right? So there's lots of considerations that go along with all these alternate requirements, right? That a lot of them will not be documented, and it's our responsibility to push back or point out these missing things, right? What should happen where there is no data? What happens where there's way too many data, right? What happens when there's missing fields? When there's missing this or that or the other? Right? How does this go? How does this affect the overall behavior of the system? So here you have some of the use case templates from these folks. They were describing the use case. The use case is that the users is trying to access their camera, and the actor is the homeowner, and their stated goal is that they want to view the output of a camera placed throughout the house. Also, we document some preconditions, right? Some assumptions of where the particular state of the system might be, right? We assume that they're already logged in, that they already have an account, right? They've already authenticated with us, Maybe they've already authenticated their email, authenticated their phone number, right, so that we can text them. So assuming all these things, right, all these preconditions, then the following scenario applies. Okay. Also, some triggers. What are the particular actions that the user takes, right? Where they would put them in following the following steps, right? And here we have 11 steps that describe the user as they interact with the system. In some cases, you'll see that the homeowner is acting, such as the homeowner logs into, the homeowner enters, and then you have the system displays, right, where you document the interaction between the actor and the system. Oftentimes, these use cases are so they should be explicit enough that we understand the process, but not so explicit that it locks me or locks the developer into some leadway, right? Some wiggle room on how to actually implement it, right? So, for instance, in a use case, you would not specify that you are clicking a button or that you're hitting a link or that. So those kinds of things would limit the use case into a particular device, right, or a particular infrastructure that might be used to implement it. It should be a little bit vague on that sense, and allow the user experience developers to decide what is the best thing to do for the user experience. Yes, or it might be that the UX designer might decide that instead of just being one page, maybe it's a wizard, right? That walks the person through 2 or 3 or 4 steps to accomplish this. Yes, so those kinds of decisions on how the actual UX experience is, that's a completely different concern, right? And the use case should not infringe on those kinds of decisions, right? Nevertheless, it should describe the overall interaction between the actor and the system. Okay. It also documents exceptions, right? Where it might be that as the homeowner goes through their interaction, right? They might find some that they don't have maybe all the information that they're being asked here, right? They might not know the password, or they might have forgotten something, or they click on the wrong button. So the exceptions are also documented, sometimes documented separately, right, as a separate list, or sometimes they're also documented right with a step where the error might occur, right? So you might have under 1, you might have steps 1A, 1B, 1C, right? That might be used to document if something goes wrong. So again, use cases are this is one particular template on how to document it, but certainly there's quite a few other templates that are also acceptable. Okay, oftentimes those templates will be provided to you by the company, right? The company that for which you're going to be working with, right? They will have templates that they have been designing and using throughout various successful projects. Okay. So this is just a zooming in onto several different sections of the template. We have here again the naming of the use case. We have the primary actor, the goal, the overall goal, the preconditions, and what triggers the actor going through the following steps. Again, this is a zooming into the scenario. Again, you'll see how we have the owner taking actions, and the system taking action, and the owner, then the system, then the owner, then the system. It's kind of conversation, right? A dialogue between the particular actor and how the system is reacting. Another way that is very popular of documenting this is using two different columns, right? Where you have on the left column you might have the actor, right? And then on the right column you have the response of the system, right? And you label the columns. You know, here's the actor and here's the system, right? And we see how they interact between the two. And here we have the exceptions. You know, what things might go wrong, that you're missing the password, or you need to validate the password, or perhaps you haven't yet configured certain preferences, and it might refer to other use cases, right? That document, you know, how is it that if you forgot your password, there will be another use case that documents how is it that you recover a password, right? Either it will be texted to you as a code, or emailed to you a link that you click on and then you come back. Right? So there will be a separate set of use cases that documents those other interactions, right? And it's a very and it's pretty common, right, that you refer to those use cases from here. Okay. Right, and at all times, you know, just be open-minded, be you know, skeptical of the whole process. Be vocal on you know, on some misgivings that you might have on the requirements. Be always make sure that you're participating, that you are involved, that you're taking ownership of the system, and that you know, the overall success is always you know, based on your participation, not only the end user's participation, but your participation, your ownership. Always looking for missing data, incomplete requirements, that things that conflict, that are inconsistent, right? And always trying to help everybody to you know, to always pull towards the same goal, right? We're all adults. We all have the same goal. It's just that, you know, we know that we are working with an imperfect system, and it might be that, you know, it's something that you're not going to be done, right? It's a focus on the journey, right, as opposed to just focusing on the end goal. You know, and knowing that this is an ever-changing process, and be open to change. Everything changes. Everything is in motion. Don't assume that anything is static. It's great that in some infrastructure, some languages, some IDEs, you know, are pretty good at helping you at identifying errors, or even suggesting changes, or even allowing you to refactor the source code to make it easy to adapt, right? To make better and write better code, and make it easier on yourself to deal with change. Okay. All right. So that's requirements.